Welcome back for another installment of Fellowship of the Rink, episode 62, brought to you by our incredible friends in Waggle Golf, 9 Mile Brewing, and Barrel Theory Beer Company. Joining me here shortly, Joe Smith of The Athletic, bringing you all the insider info on the Minnesota Wild here in a crazy series with the Vegas Golden Knights. Going to get into a meaty mailbag. Thank you all for contributing and commenting on Twitter/X, the Everything platform. But we'll also address things we're looking at going into Game 5 and just the series as a whole. Do want to give a shout out to our awesome friends here, Waggle Golf. Everyone, make sure you go and follow them across all social media platforms. Waggle is going to be dropping a lot of awesome apparel all summer long. Golf season just upon us. And right now, you can go over to getyourwaggleon.com, throw in promo code SP10 to take 10% off your entire order. Our friends at 9 Mile Brewing need you to know that they opened their kitchen and things are going without a hitch. They have pizza. They've got giant pretzels, cheese curds, wings, the whole spread on top of the incredible beer offering that they've always had in their Bloomington taproom. So anyone in the South Metro or anyone just looking for a great place to go hang out, have good beer, have good food, maybe even watch some playoff hockey, look no further than 9 Mile Brewing. And if you're an IPA fan at all, Current Obsession is definitely the highest recommendation in our household. It's actually one of my wife's favorite IPAs. But they also have an award-winning West Coast IPA, shout out producer Isha, who's way more into that style than myself, but just took home some awards, so definitely worth giving all of that a try on top of their wide spread of beer allocation beyond it. Thursday, we have a Game 6 at home at the XL Energy Center. Everyone, and I mean everyone, should be bum rushing Section 105 to get the crowler of the day, Lafleur, in honor of our Marc-Andre Fleury. But it's an incredible deal for delicious beer, and it's just badass walking around with a giant can. But if you're not going to the game, or if you're looking for what you need to do pre or post game festivities, the tap room just down the road. It's a 15-minute walk, way easier parking, and no free ads, but Allery's, shout out. They've got a great barbecue allocation if you want to get a little bit of food. If you go in and buy one drink, you get your parking in the parking ramp next to them comped. Really quick walk over to Barrel Theory, have some great beers. You can even catch a shuttle from Allery's to get to the game. So why not go out and pregame on East 7th instead of trying to maybe get a spot at Tom Reed's, where you're going to be shoulder to shoulder and maybe can get a beer before the game. But Barrel Theory is where it's at, pregame, postgame, and during the game at the X. If you don't get the crowler, check out Raindrops, their flagship IPA, on tap at sections 112, 217, and club level 36. With that, let's kick it over to Joe for our meaty Minnesota Wild mailbag. All right, as promised on Twitter, everyone, we have a meaty mailbag that we're going to run through. Very Minnesota Wild focused and heavy, as you always expect. I was actually kind of surprised going through this, Joe, that there wasn't like a crazy amount of anger and negativity, which is usually the case with Minnesota Wild fans, especially after a pretty unfortunate loss there in Game 4. I mean, I have to ask you before the mailbag, how insane was the atmosphere in the arena? Because I wasn't there, and I've been to some crazy playoff games, but everyone told me like what we saw in Games 3 and 4 hasn't been matched.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I remember like the first playoffs I covered here a couple of years ago, I noticed how incredibly loud it was. And so I was wondering what it would be like this time. And I think especially Game 3, like the buzzer-beating goal by Kaprizov from Hartman, and then at the end, empty netter by Foligno, I think that was as loud as I've heard it, the building overall. And I think, I've only been here a few years, so I don't have as frame of reference as other people do. But I know Russo, been here forever. He said is one of the loudest he's ever heard it at the building, and he's been here a long time. So, I think there's been such a build up and crescendo for this, the way they ended the season and made the playoffs with 20 seconds left. And I think there's a lot more optimism among Wild fans than there have been in years past. So whether that's faulty or not remains to be seen, but there definitely is a different kind of vibe there, I think. And the team is, I mean, it's a lot of guys that I'm sure the fans are fun to root for, right? From Gusson to Kaprizov and Boldy, there are a lot of guys that they're pretty excited about. So I can see why.
Yeah, that's for sure. Let's open it up here. First question coming from Jade Forshee. I love Dean Evason, but does this team having better postseason was this in part have something to do with Hines being a little more mild-tempered compared to Dean?
Well, I mean, I think also Dean Evason, behind closed doors is different than the Dean Evason who was yelling at the refs and all that stuff like that. So keep that in mind too when it comes to that. And the Wild have as many postseason wins as they had with Dean. Dean had 2 wins, in that last series as well against Dallas. So not quite there yet, but I do think that Hines has a little more of he's not as fired up on the bench. You can see kind of poker face a lot there. But behind closed doors, he's just a very his meetings aren't long. They're like very short, quick hit things. He's a very good communicator with players, a lot of one-on-ones with them. Very positive. Just like Dean was very positive too. Like he could put an arm around your shoulder too as well. So I think that the Dean that you saw on TV or on the bench and asking Bonus to fight and stuff like that, it just there's that persona, but behind closed doors, he was very good with players and very positive and had those one-on-ones like Hines. Hines is just very structured, really good communicator. He has those details down. The team knows exactly what they need to do to win a game. It's less kind of rah-rah or less kind of motivational speaking and more of like, I think players nowadays want to know why or how a lot more than just they want to know what will help them win more than anything else in the entire world. So I think Hines has done a good job communicating that and staying in a calm presence when they've had those ups and downs the course of the season, all the adversity that they've hit.
Yeah, I mean, to your point too, Dean Evason came at a time where they needed the rah-rah. They needed a player's coach because the culture was just in such a place that it needed to be completely flipped. And he did exactly that. And then you've got John Hines, which I will agree with the person that asked the question. Like, sure, he's definitely brought a different demeanor and presence to this postseason, but coming into this, was the narrative not, oh, great, John Hines, he's never won a playoff series?
I mean, no one, he's not Mike Sullivan, right? He's not coming in with that kind of pedigree. But
you gotta hit me with that today, Joe. God,
I know, too soon. But yeah, like I think I can see where you're right. They came in 2 different parts of this Wild franchise, and the guys that Dean had early in his time are now like much more mature veteran players, like and leaders than the ones before. The Boldy's coming into his own, becoming a leader. I know, Hartman and Foligno and Kirill Kaprizov is a whole different personality, or just totally opened up more than he was when he first got here. So I think maybe Hines is reaping some of the rewards a little bit, or from the work that Dean Evason did put in his staff. Not a disservice or discrediting what Hines has done, because he's been terrific this year. And had they not fallen off a little bit more with the injury second half, he could have been in consideration for the coach of the year, I thought, if they didn't kind of fall to the wild card position, because who in the preseason thought this was a top 3 team in the Western Conference or in the Central Division? And they probably would have been in the top 3 had they not, lost Kirill Kaprizov for 3 months and for 2 months.
That is for sure. All right, next couple here that we've got are more indicative of decisions from John Hines. First one here from Ben Gorman. Do the Wild follow Bruce Cassidy splitting up his top line and try separating Kaprizov and Boldy at any point in this series in order to see if you can gain more balanced scoring lines?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of the reason why Cassidy did that was because Eichel and Stone were struggling, trying to spark Eichel a little bit. In this case, Kaprizov and Boldy have been terrific with Eriksson Ek. So I just don't see them switching that one. I also don't see them switching the Foligno, Hartman, and Zuccarello line from Game 4. I think it's more of a decision, which we'll get into probably later in this podcast, of do you elevate a guy like Marco Rossi, right? Freddie Gaudreau hasn't had a great series or great production going forward. Gus Nyquist hasn't had, I say, one even strength goal in the last 70 games. So I think the question more for me in getting more balance and getting that kind of thing is with the decision of moving guys up like a Caprice. I'm sorry, the Rossi and Trennians, who's been really good too. And so they've gotten some goals out of their fourth line. Not like the Wild haven't had a lot of some semblance of balance. I know they've been top heavy with Kaprizov and Boldy, but they've had some contributions down the lineup. Zuccarello's had a goal. Hartman's played really well. So I think what happened last game is a show that like the depth isn't quite there as with the cap hits and all that stuff, because Johansson leaves the lineup and all of a sudden there is a little bit of a hole there. Maybe you put a Liam Ohgren in, which I'd be
right to the next question here. Gary Therms wants to know any chance we see Liam Ohgren in this series. And I think to your point, Marcus Johansson going out of the lineup is really what spurred this. I don't think anyone was really asking or worried about Ogrren up until that point. But do you think he is a better fit to slot in the middle six than what we saw from a Vinny Hinestroza or some of the other guys that might be vying for a spot?
I do. I think he'd be, if Johansson's out, I mean, and I asked Hines about this before last game, like, is Ogrren an option? And he said that's definitely an option we're going to consider or talk about with our staff and everything else. But he didn't practice with the team that day before game 4, so I knew he wasn't in the lineup. And then we'll see practice today. If he's joined the big group in practice, that might give him a better indication if they're considering that. But the guy's did really well in Iowa. He's got an elite level shot. He's playing with all-time confidence. I talked to him at the end of the year in Iowa, and he's like, I told my girlfriend, he's like, I want my life here, only up there. You know, he wants that role and that feel and that mojo that he had, and he's dying for that chance. And I think that with his shot, with his scoring ability, maybe a little bit of juice to the lineup, maybe a young guy come in, and he's really responsible defensively. This guy can play both sides. Not that he'll put him in the penalty kill right away, but he can defend in his own end. He's responsible that way. So now you're putting a guy who's this flashy scorer who you're worried about playing in a tight game. I think he has that in him, and the Wild have seen that from him in short stints in the NHL. So he would absolutely give them a boost, I think, and it just matter if Hines and his staff are actually going to consider that doing that.
For sure. And I mean, the perfect passing of the baton from Marcus Johansson to a young lad who looked up to him and aspired to be him in Liam Ohgren. Next one, I don't think is a shock that it's being asked, but if you're going to dress Zeev and barely play him in third or overtime, what's the point? Coming from Steve Berglin. So how do you break out the way things played out? Because for me, Joe, I'm not like shocked that he was stapled to the bench to an extent after the penalty, but to not play him in overtime on the power play, it's a pretty clear indicator that you're really not happy if you're going to actually go to that length.
And I think what surprised us is, game 1, his debut, and he's playing 6-on-5 situation, end of game on the road in his first game. And we asked John Hines, oh, that's a lot of trust you put in this kid. And he's like, well, that's why he's in the lineup. Like, if you're not going to play him to his strengths or to what got him here, why even play him? Right. That was kind of his line, And so like, okay, well, that makes sense. If you're going to play him and over John Merrill, like his strengths are the power play, moving the puck around, everything like that. Gives you the best chance to score a goal when you're down 1. I get it. And so that's why this was such a contradiction last game when he had the 4-minute major or 4-minute double minor for high sticking, which is bad timing. It led to a goal. I don't think he was, it was inadvertent. It was kind of more of a careless, I guess, play versus like a malicious play. It just was bad timing or bad luck, as Jared Spurgeon called it. But it did, put them in a bad spot. And obviously, rookies are going to have those situations. So I wasn't surprised that he didn't play as much down the stretch. But you look at the flip side of it, you don't play him in overtime, you don't play him on the power play. That leads to having Brodin and Middleton play a lot of minutes, right? They're basically cycling in just 2 left shot D the rest of the way. And we don't know. We didn't talk to Middleton after the game, but you have to imagine those guys looked gassed towards the end. And whether that led to the mistake that led to the game-winning goal of the fan pass and this and the scramble in front of the net, I don't know. But it's odds are when your top left shot D are basically playing every other shift and maybe potentially tired, then that could play into it. So that's the ripple effect of that decision. I understood it to a certain extent. You go with the guys that you trust the most in the most important period of the season so far, right? Because if they win that game, all of a sudden it's three games to 1 and you have a stranglehold in the series. So I get you go with the guys that you trust, play favorite 30-something minutes, whatever. But it does go back to what he said before, after game 1, and you wonder how that'll affect his decision for Game 5 going forward.
No, very fair. And let's rip the Band-Aid off. The question we all knew was coming. We've got a couple of different iterations of this, but Mateo, producer for Judd's Buds, do you get the sense that the refs are calling the game with reputation in mind? It seems like least penalized team in the league gets a lot of 50-50 calls breaking their way. And shout out Lucas Lawrence, who just says Game 4 refs. Enough said.
Well, I mean, there were some questionable calls, no doubt. I mean, I think you can go to every single playoff game in this whole entire Stanley Cup playoffs and find calls that for one team or another, they're going to be pissed off about him. And I think early in the series, especially the first couple of games, it felt like the reputation preceded themselves. Like they're either their least penalized team because they're so disciplined, or they're least penalized team because it followed like, oh, refs knew going into the game they were not going to be this chippy team. But they have the biggest defense core in the league. How do they not have more penalties? But I hate getting that in that kind of crawl space of blaming referees for endings in games when a lot of decisions or plays that were made or not made during the game were not penalty related. So I think as long as it's both sides, and I think the Wild would prefer 5-on-5, right? They think they've been the better team 5-on-5 overall. You look at the numbers analytically, I know they can be skewed one way because of the shot attempts, but as far as the high danger chances and getting inside, I think the Wild will much prefer a 5-on-5 game with the way their power play has struggled at times here. The penalty kill, of course, give another couple goals. So I think they prefer them to swallow their whistles and not call anything. And so to their credit, the Wild players have not said anything, which has been a kind of a stark contrast from the Dallas series 2 years ago. If you remember, I think the referees kind of got into their head a little bit and they got a little ticked off, let them affect their game. And Foligno had obviously the comments in the post game, and then he had the major penalty on the road in a pivotal game. So you're seeing them handle that in a much more mature and disciplined manner, which I think gives them a better chance to win the series.
Yeah, and as an extension of that, Keenan Corona. Hey, there we go. What are the chances the NHL will review the many missed calls in this series and consider referee changes? Now, I know they kind of do that like series to series to an extent, but it's never really done within series, is it?
I don't think it's done within the series. I think it'll be done after, but they have the series supervisor is always there, and they're marking every call and they're evaluating every call. So those guys, those refs are not say graded, but they are evaluated like anybody else is in their job. So I don't think there's like egregious or blatant calls here that are all of a sudden lose your job worthy. But I think if you see a pattern with a certain ref crew, guys need to earn their spot in calling some of these very high level games, see how important they are. So that's more of an evaluation, I think, between series than it is between games.
Yeah, and I think I'm with you too, that I don't think the refs have lost us the games, but I still understand the fan sentiment that there are calls that you'd really like to see called in certain spots, but none of those calls have directly led to the results we've seen. So it's tough, but I get it from a fan perspective.
Absolutely.
All right, next one here from Gaz Top. Is the performance as good as we could really expect given the depth disparity? So basically to say, like, hey, are the Wild doing everything we could hope and like we should just be happy that they're doing as well, or is there another gear?
Well, I mean, I think Wild players will be a lot happier to be up 3-1 having an extra goal last game. And so I can see the anxiety and the tension there because of the past history. And now it's a best of 3 and 2 games in Vegas. But I think if you watched all the games, I think if you're a Wild fan, you should be pretty happy with how well they played. Like they very well could have won each one of those 4 games. They played well enough to win each one of the 4 games, right? They've had the better play and a good part of it. Their best players have been their best players, right? Kaprizov, Boldy, can't complain about that. Gusson has delivered and been even better than he was a couple of years ago against Dallas. So you have the growth there. Ryan Hartman, it's been a great. I had a story in the Athletic today about him and just kind of his resurgence and playing. He's built for playoff hockey and he's showing it. So I think you look at a lot of positives you can look at with the Wild in terms of, Foligno looks healthy and he's been a hit machine. So I think there have been obviously some mistakes made, and there have been maybe some decisions that maybe they'll look back and question maybe the coaching staff on personnel and stuff. But I think if you had told, anybody before the series it'd be 2-2 going to game 5, I think they'd be pretty happy, considering the way that they're playing. They're not lucking into these 2 wins. And Vegas is not just like, they're not just goaling Vegas and stealing games here. Like they're up there with them. And I think Vegas is aware of how big of a challenge this with the Wild team is. They're not going to be easy to put away.
Yeah. And I mean, I'll be the first to admit, hand up, I'd never look at this team through the forest green tinted glasses. I've never really seen a Wild roster where I'm like, yep, this is a team that can or should win this series. This team has shown me that they absolutely can. Now, we got a 3-game series ahead of us, and I don't even know how to handicap it, but this is a team that is worthy and capable of beating the opponent on the other side. So I don't know. I think it's going to be really exciting down the stretch here. Like, even if Vegas takes it in 6, I think there's a lot of positives to take away from how this is rolled out, but we'll dive a lot more into that in post-mortem if that does come to pass.
Look at the third line is like Gaudreau, Nyquist, and Hinostroza last game, right? They're all good players in their own right, but like just to shows the depth differential between other teams in the league, just because they have the cap hits that's 2 $7 million players that they could have on this team, whether it's a guy in the top 6 or another defenseman. So and time will tell what happens this summer, who they get and who they can acquire, and is Rossi here and who this and that. But I think overall, like, considering the players that they have on this roster, and I think John Hynes has gotten as much out of it as he possibly could, considering the injuries and now being put together again.
For sure. Next one up here, Dino, chiming in pretty much any time that we make posts, wondering about where we're at with Iowa, but he asks, when's your Iowa story coming out? And is it safe to say we are stuck with Brett and Matt for another season, as Bill Guerin hasn't pulled the string yet?
I mean, I think Matt Hendricks is still gonna be there as a GM. Obviously they haven't made a change with Brett at this point, and that obviously if they do decide to do that, they could do it after the season, right? The stories, to answer his first question, the stories are going to come out, I think, after the Wild are out of the playoffs, unless there's a maybe between series, if there is that particular case. It just felt like timing wise, it was hard to thrust those in the middle of before a game 5, right? But I have a lot of stories to write from that trip to Iowa, talking to Brett, talking to players, everybody else like that, and overall in the big picture there. So that'll answer your first question. It'll come out probably after the series, or whenever the Wild are eliminated. And number 2, I don't think Hendricks is going anywhere, obviously. Hendricks was very positive in his support for Brett McLean when I was there. And Brett is always a positive influence on players. I know I talked to players about him and stuff, but I think whether Bill Guerin decides to make a change on that probably won't happen until after the Wild are done with the playoffs here. And you can make an argument both ways. You can make an argument of like, hey, you need to win to develop players too, and Brett's taken the kind of hard last couple of years of losses, so you got to understand the decision both ways. But I don't know if just because they haven't done it yet doesn't mean it won't happen. So we'll see. But a lot of this stuff will happen after the Wild are done from the playoffs.
For sure. Well, that brings us to our final mailbag question, which always brought to you by our incredible friends at Waggle Golf. Everybody go to getyourwaggleon.com. Throw in promo code SP10 to take 10% off your entire order. Hats, polos, quarter zips. They got the full spread. Golf season's around the corner. Go support them. The meaty one, Joe. We've got Drew Berglin coming in saying Gaudreau over Rossi is a choice. Feels like a wrong choice. Trading him in the offseason for a team that has always lacked center depth will backfire. I'm also starting to not trust GM Bill Guerin with that move.
Tell me how you really feel, Drew. I think it's
pour it out.
Yeah. I don't know if there's a question there. But I think we got into this, and we'll have more on this topic in our story for Tuesday on the Athletic about what we see, what we've learned from this series so far. But I do think that Rossi has deserved and warranted more playing time. I was just stunned that he played only 4 minutes plus after the first 2 periods, and then that line didn't play for the final 13 minutes, I think, the second period, and then the first 7 of the third. They play in overtime too. I know Hynes mentioned it was just situational, and there's a lot of the special teams and that kind of stuff in that period, which you whether you believe that or not, it's up to you. But I don't understand. Like, I think Hartman deserved and was warranted to move up the lineup, and so I don't see why your third leading goal scorer in the regular season, a guy who scored back-to-back games in the playoffs, hasn't warranted more ice time. And I can't make Marco feel good going into the summer. Can't make him feel good about contract talks and how the Wild feel about him. So it's a lot of bigger picture layers here than just him not playing enough minutes in a playoff game. These are all have these bigger picture ramifications. And I know, as Mike Russo, my colleague, reported or wrote in his story on Rossi over the weekend, there was an offer of 5x5 to Rossi a while back, so clearly that wasn't signed. I think a lot of depend on this summer of whether Rossi is here or not, is how much he wants. It seems like the Wild have a certain number that they're willing and comfortable and happy with to pay Marco. And if there's something that doesn't work, then there's probably a situation where he might be traded, or other team might offer sheet him, right? So you might trade him before the offer sheet happens. So I think overall, this hasn't been decided yet, but I think the tea leaves of him not playing as much in the playoffs definitely don't help matters, at least in my opinion, from Rossi or Rossi's camp, just because of you want to be valued, you want to feel like you're part of the future. And if this is how they feel about where he is at this game, like this is not a type of guy you're going to pay $8 million a year if you're playing him on the fourth line, right? So a lot of things to unpack on that one, but we'll see how that plays out. Maybe show for practice today is in the second line. Maybe he plays 18 minutes in Game 5, and all of a sudden there's more things to come. But it'll be interesting to see. I know you probably have your own opinions on this one.
Yeah, I highly doubt that he gets 18 minutes in Game 5, but that'd be awesome. I mean, for me, the two things I really want to hit on there, because I'm with you in the sense like he needs more minutes, but I'm not like a lot of the fans out there that are like banging the table saying he needs to play with Kaprizov and Boldy, or he needs to be on the second line. He just deserves more minutes than what he's being given. And what has the third line, quote unquote, on paper shown us to say that they deserve more time than the fourth line? I like Hinestroza, obviously he came in after not playing for a while, but Gaudreau has not been on his game like he was down the stretch of the regular season. And Gustav Nyquist, he's looked better, but he's still not what Garen was hoping he was getting when he sent out a second-round pick for him at this deadline. The fourth line has played very well. And am I saying that they need to be playing 20 minutes a game? No. But the numbers that you just went through, how little they've played as they've been scoring goals and playing responsibly, it's crazy to me. But my question to you is, if you are the Ben Hankinson of Marco Rossi, if you are his agent, do you take a 5x5?
I mean, I don't think 5-on-5 is a bad offer. I think you look at Lindell and Dylan Strome, very good players. That's the contract that they basically have. So I think those are probably the comps that the Wild are looking at. If I'm the agent, I'm going to obviously want more, right? I'm going to want long-term. I'm going to want ask me for 8x8 or whatever. But I think their camp views him as a number 1 or number 2 center. Where do the Wild view him long-term with the guys that they have currently in their lineup, right? And also Urov is coming, and what if they do in free agency this summertime? So I think it all depends on the value depends on how you see the player. Is he a top 6 guy? The top 6 centers get paid pretty well on long-term deals, but if you don't view him as that, that's where So I'm not. What I'm saying is 5x5 isn't a insulting offer by any stretch of imagination. Sure. Does that mean that that Rossi and his camp have to take it? No, doesn't. So I think that's where lies the rub, right? If they feel like they're not happy with it, and they have it's RFA, so not UFA. He's not a free agent this summertime, but if the Wild get the feeling that this is not going to work, or that this is not going to budge and this is not going to find a way, then it behooves them to consider trade options at the draft before there is the summer of the offer sheet, right? Because teams are seeing this and they know, if they value Marco more than maybe the Wild do in a certain sense, they can maybe put some pressure on Minnesota at that particular point at an uncomfortable number. So that's still a little ways from now, and we'll see what happens. But I think, I don't think it was a bad offer, but I understand if the agent for them or for Marco Rossi, wants to push the envelope and how he views himself as a player and how they view him going forward.
No, and I see both sides of it because I'm with you. I don't think it's an outright disrespectful offer. I think that a lot of the chatter around the offer and him turning it down and people being like, this is a no-brainer for both sides. Why wouldn't he take it? I think that's disrespectful. When you look at yes, it's a comparable contract to the ones you mentioned. The salary cap is doing completely different things now. Those were signed before we knew how it was going to move up incrementally the next couple of years. And you don't owe him anything by any stretch, but this kid has come in and done literally everything you've asked him to, staying for the summer, missing his sister's wedding, whatever. We don't have to exhaust this subject. I understand the Wild stance that if they don't think he's a top 6 center, don't give him top 6 center money. Mm-hmm. I just don't know what more he needs to show them to at least get them on the page that he's warranting that type of discussion. And I hope it's not that they're just banking on Urov, which they very well could be, but we'll see how it plays out this summer. It's going to give us plenty to talk about, probably weekly on here until it actually unfolds. But again, everyone go out, support our great friends. Waggle Golf, getyourwaggleon.com, promo code SP10 to take 10% off your order. Joe, let's wrap then with final thoughts, whether it's for Game 5, the remainder of the series. And I think the biggest one that we need to at least lead in here with, you guys have been writing about it. Ryan Hartman looks like a completely different guy.
I mean, this is a playoff version of Ryan Hartman, right? I mean, I think in the playoff series that we've seen, or even Dallas especially, he was a big time player there. But it's been striking, not just that he's showing restraint by not taking the bait, right, which is impressive in its own right, but he's skating really well. He's blocking shots. He's getting in lanes. He's creating he's doing everything that you could probably ask for, other than maybe scoring goals here at this particular point. And so that's a really, I think, encouraging thing for the Wild now and big pictures. I think there was probably a question after the suspension and everything else happening, how much patience will the Wild have with him going forward, But I think that, him playing this way, this is if he can play like this all the time, this is a very valuable player at $4 million, right? He can play up and down your lineup. He can play center or wing. But he's, very answered the call and the response to what they need. And it shows because I think, Hines obviously was probably frustrated with him earlier in the season and then obviously with the suspension. And, but it shows a player can kind of earn that trust and get back because he's been properly elevated in the lineup on the power play and everything. So obviously it's a great sign for the Wilds and for Ryan too, and give him credit for, handling a difficult situation he put himself in, obviously with the suspension, making the most of it in that 6 weeks of training and getting in great shape and working on his shot and everything like that. And then being there for his teammates, because he's a really well-loved guy in that room and a respected guy by his fellow teammates. So, him playing better can only help the group, especially as they go deeper into the series. He has those clutch moments left in him.
For sure. And no one gives out a Conn Smythe 4 games into the first round. Am I out to lunch thinking that if they did, right now it goes to Philip Gustafsson?
I don't know if it would be. I mean, it'd be hard to pass up a Kirill or Boldy, right? For Conn Smythe. Obviously, if they keep on their numbers the rest of the way, those two guys will be up in that discussion if they do go on a playoff run like that. But I think what's most encouraging about Gustafsson is he doesn't have a lot of playoff experience. He said he was a little more nervous last time against Dallas, but he's shown the ability to make the key and timely saves over and over again in this playoff series. And, I think he's shown the ability to outduel Adin Hill, who's a cup champion goalie on the other side with more experience. He's shown he can be a guy who can give the guys the confidence that they can make a mistake and he can be there. So he's a very mature and very mentally tough goalie right now. And I think that's a very good sign as they have to try to win another game in Vegas here Gustafson's already done it. So I think it shows you what they have in him. And as Wyatt had wrote before the series started, they have the goalie of the now, and they may have the goalie of the future right here in Philip Gustafson.
For sure. What are the keys then that you're watching going into game 5? Like, what's going to make the difference on who tips the scale and takes the 3-2 lead?
Well, I mean, I think a key for me is watching, does Eichel and Stone get the momentum from last game where I thought they looked a lot better? I think Eichel had 13 shot attempts. Stone had that assist on the hurdle controversial goal. Like, if they start getting some of their mojo back, it'll be a lot more difficult for them to be beaten, obviously. I think the start of the game will be so important in Vegas. Making Vegas chase them in some of those early games of the series really benefited the Wild because they could play their defensive style and shut them down. So I think overall, just those couple of things. And then, I know the Wild hope there's no penalties, but if the special teams need to be better, the power play needs to be able to come through in bigger moments like they did. They could have last game, penalty kill as well. So I think the start of the game will be interesting to see just who's playing tight, who's not, what kind of Wild team are they going to see going to game 5? Is this a team that feels like, they could play with Vegas and they're right there, then, or is it Vegas comes out and said that they finally figured it out. They woke up and they, all of a sudden, this is the team that was one of the hottest teams on the stretch in the NHL. So the beginning of the game will be a good tell, I think, for me.
For sure. And because you put him in my mind earlier in the mailbag, I have to ask, no disrespect, absolutely zero intended disrespect to John Hines. Regardless of how this series ends up, is there a chance that he's relieved of duties because Ogrren wants to go grab his guy, Mike Sullivan?
Well, I think there are a lot of teams that want to grab their guy, Mike Sullivan. I think the Rangers are right there. I think the Boston Bruins are right there. I think he makes $5.5 million, second only to John Cooper on a contract. So I wouldn't go that stretch to say that as far as Minnesota Wild right now. I know Ogrren and him have a great relationship, and he's a guy that any team would want to have. But I think there's so many different teams right now out there that have the money and the opportunity. Boston, Philly, Chicago, New York. These
are all teams that I hate, Joe. This is terrible.
So he's gonna have his pick of the litter, and gonna be making probably $7 million or something, so, or whatever it might be. So it's hard to put that thing over a Minnesota Wilder in the playoff situation right now. I do think he's a great coach. I do think him and Bill get along really well together. And if there was circumstances were different, like he'd be looking for a head coach right now, absolutely, I think he'd be the first guy that they would call. But I think that there'll be a lot of other teams getting a head start on that opportunity coming here in a few days.
That is for sure. Well, I know you got to get running and get to morning skate here, Joe. So, guys, until next week, hopefully we've got some exciting things to talk about after games 5 and 6. I think that's for sure going to be played out, maybe even 7 by that point. But go Wild. Thank you all for tuning in for, again, another week here. 62 in total that you guys have been along for this ride. Maybe some of you haven't been along for all of it, but we appreciate you all the same. If you could, definitely check us out on YouTube as well if you haven't already. If you could subscribe or give 5 stars to wherever you're listening on audio, anything you can do greatly helps us. And if you comment on the videos, we are looking at all of that. So if there's anything you want to recommend, whether it's new topics, things that you think we should have for new segments, guests that you want us to feature, let us know. And we're happy to do our best to accommodate that, because you guys are the reason we do this. You're the only reason that we continue to keep on putting out this content. So thank you all. We love you. Go Minnesota Wild. You stay classy, stay to hockey.